And welcome back. Well, as you can see here, we got our block back from the machine shop and we're ready to start the assembly to turn this into a long block to eventually get it back inside of our project truck here. What we're going to do is I'm going to try to keep these videos to hopefully between 40 minutes and an hour. It may go a little bit longer, just kind of depending on where we want to break in the process of this. We'll be able to take it to a certain extent here, and then we're going to have to stop and wait for the new head gaskets to come in, and I'll cover that a little bit more in detail when we get back to this. But what I want to do first is we're going to do a modification to the new cam phaser. You can see the machine shop also went ahead and pre-installed the cam to make sure that the fitment and the tolerances were correct with the new cam bearings. But I tell you what, while we're here, let's go over a little bit of what's taken place on the block thus far. Now you can see the block has been cleaned. It's been painted where it needed to be painted. And just like the last block, no harm, no foul. Our sealing surfaces, when we get ready to put our timing covers and everything on, we'll just take a little brake clean, little shop towel, and just clean off the paint from the areas that it doesn't need to be on. But to show you what, again, you can see what they've done here. The block's been bored out, and we have new forged pistons as well as rings installed. And in case you're curious, the part number will be upside down for you, but hopefully you can see the part number of the piston there. And we've also had, obviously, new performance cam bearings installed. We've had new crank bearings installed as well as everything has been balanced, rebalanced, I should say, and the crank has been polished. So we gave them the items such as all the pulleys that'll be on the front of our crank, our flex plate in the back, and they balanced all that as a single assembly for us. The first thing we're going to do when we get back to the block is that we're going to have to put the engine back on the engine hoist so we can get enough clearance in the back here to get a new rear main seal installed, and then once that's done, we'll put it back on the engine stand for the remainder of the work. Now, the block itself, you can see that we got a very nice prep surface here now. They took 6/1000ths of an inch off of each side of the block face where the cylinder heads would mount. Now, I've spoke with the machine shop about this, and they suggested a set of Cometic at least 10/1000ths of an inch thicker head gaskets to account for that. I also got in touch with my tuner who sold us the new cam kit for this build, and let him know that they also blocked the deck and I'm sorry, decked the block. I said that backwards. 6/1000ths of an inch, and just wanted to confirm with him, per the machine shop as well, that it wasn't going to cause an issue with the particular cam that was chosen for this build out. Tuner got back with me and said that 6/1000ths of an inch wasn't enough of a blocking or AKA material being removed off the block to basically cause any major type issue, and that the cam that we've chosen for this, with its high lift, would still be just fine. Now, with that being said, I did research this and spoke with Cometic on this about using the recommendations from the machine shop. And Cometic makes a nice set of gaskets, but it's potentially 4 to 6 weeks because they make them on order if it's something they don't have on hand. But I did do a little bit of research and found that Mall makes a set of head gaskets that are about 10/1000ths of an inch thicker than stock. So that should, if we use those head gaskets, eat up or replace the 6/1000ths that have been removed, as well as what will end up happening is that should leave about 4 thousandths extra, so the heads will be actually up off of the block, maybe about 4 thousandths of an inch, so 4 thousandths of an inch or so higher than normal. Now, it doesn't look like even 6 thousandths if we were to use stock gaskets, or even the 4 thousandths if we go with the mall ones, which I have ordered, by the way. So having those cylinder heads up 4 thousandths of an inch higher than they normally would be, it doesn't sound like it's going to cause too much of an issue with the push rod length that we have, as well as any kind of preload issue. It didn't seem like 6 thousandths of an inch was going to cause that major of an issue to need all new push rods and the whole 9 yards. Now, if we get in the realm of 10 thousandths or more, or doing something really, outlandishly custom with the valve train, then yes. Now, I have looked into it, the different measuring methods, and I've looked into the different sizes available for push rods, and they generally start to jump and go to the next size when you get to like 10 thousandths bigger or 12 thousandths bigger, things of that nature. So I think, and obviously like I said, we're going to build this long block up to the point before we put the heads on, because the head gaskets, those thicker ones from Mall, won't be here until a couple of days from now. But we'll go ahead and do everything that we can up into obviously before we put the heads on. So I'm kind of curious, what are your thoughts? If you want to put them in the comments below, that if we have 6 thousandths taken off the deck, or decked off the block, I should say, and we're going to put a Mall head gasket on here that's 10 thousandths thicker than stock, so that will give us back the 6 thousandths taken off of the block. But it's going to mean that the heads will still be sticking out 4 thousandths of an inch roughly higher than they normally would. Meaning that, yeah, we will be, slightly less of a preload on our lifters in that case. But and I have looked at it. I'm going to look for it again. I tried to find what the lifter preload range was for a 5.7 Hemi, and I can't find it with an all data, but I'm going to do a little bit more research to see if I can find it. I think having the heads up an extra 4 thousandths of an inch should still be within preload spec of those lifters. But again, I look forward to some comments below and what everybody thinks on that one. Another thing that we had done, obviously, besides the work you see here and going with the forged pistons, which were probably, admittedly, a bit of an overkill on this motor, but we went ahead and went with it anyway. Just to kind of future-proof our block, so to speak, so any future modifications, we know we got a nice strong set of pistons in here. Now, the other thing about these pistons is you'll notice they're not domed like a typical Hemi piston. They've got a little bit of a dish, so you actually have a little bit of valve relief, so to speak, built into the center of these pistons, which is pretty nice. Now, if you're looking down here at the crank, maybe you saw this earlier, you'll see that there's been another keyway slot cut into this crank, which is not there on a standard Hemi. Now, you'll have this key back here, which is for your lower timing gear, but this one here, we had them add this, and what we're going to use this one for is for our, and let me show it. You've seen this before in the previous video, but that's going to be our spot where our super dampener gets plugged into. So since they had it at the machine shop, I gave them the parts off the super dampener and asked if they could do us a favor. And that favor being this. Now we have to use the super damper, if you remember, with the ProCharge kit, because this is a stage 2 ProCharge kit, meaning the head unit, the supercharger, is driven by its own belt. So this hub goes on the crank, and then there's a ATI damper pulley you see there, goes onto this hub. This drives the accessories like the alternator and the water pump and such. And then ProCharger inside the kit gives you that nice pulley there, which bolts to the outside of the first pulley. And this is the drive pulley for the supercharger unit. Now, ProCharger in their kit, like with any other kit, even if this was a stock kit, they give you what you see here, which is our pinning kit. And you'll notice you got a nice long bit because this is a stage 2 pinning kit. And the reason why that bit is so long is when this is on the crank, what they want you to do via the ProCharge kit is put the jig in, and then you end up drilling a little semicircular hole, or you drill a hole, I should say, ends up being semicircular here and the other half in the crank, but you end up drilling a hole between the wall here, so to speak, where it goes on the crankshaft, and the crankshaft itself. So you end up with a hole about yay deep, and I'll show you the pin here. And again, it's semicircular, so you get half of the drilled hole here in the crank, half of the drilled hole inside that hub, and then you take this pin that you see here in the kit, and basically you pin that ATI dampener hub to the crankshaft. And that's to keep the lower pulley from spinning when it's got that inertia built up in the supercharger and you go to slow down abruptly or come to a stop, things of that nature. It eliminates the potential for that lower crank pulley to spin on the crankshaft. So that's all well and fine, sorry. And I'm not knocking the pinning kit. It does work, and it works phenomenally well when you're installing this into an engine bay, and you just need to pin the existing system that's there without having to, pull the engine or do something different. Now, it's not just ProCharger. There's a lot of supercharger kits that use a very similar method of pinning the crank, as it's called. Now, my only issue with this is that when you pin this, because you see how long that pin is, that's roughly how deep they have you drill that hole. So you end up with a hole that doesn't go the length of this. And it's fine, but if you ever pull the lower pulley off, getting the two semicircular holes to line back up when you go to press that pulley back in place so that you can put the pin back in is kind of difficult. Versus if you have, in this particular hub from ATI, had a keyway already cut into it. So what happens here is, and I have it in the box back there, but we'll install the other key, and what happens now is if we ever have to pull this hub off and then put this hub back on, we can now easily do so. And I don't have to line anything up. It will line itself up because we'll have the key in here already inside this slot. And since that keyway goes all the way through this hub adapter here, we literally just, we'll have the keyway there. We'll get it lined up on the key, and then we'll just press this back in place. So it makes it a much easier job on us in the future if we ever have to remove and replace this. So again, since the machine shop had it and they were doing their work to it, we gave them this. They took the measurements off of it, and they, again, did us a favor and cut a keyway and provided us the key for the crank that you see there. So it was kind of one of those, well, while you're there, could you take care of this for us and, eliminate some potential future headache that you may run into? Because again, these work, and I get why they're used, especially, again, if you're installing one of these kits and you have to pin the crank, but you're doing this while the motor's still installed. It's a really quick, easy way of pinning that pulley onto that crank and basically getting the job done. It just, again, could potentially lead to some headache in the future. And the reason why I say that is on our 2500 out there, which is also Pro Charge, it has this type of pinning kit in it. And when we had to pull the front pulley off to do the cam swap, getting that lower pulley to get those two semicircular holes to match up, because again, half the pinhole was on the crank, half the pinhole was on the inside lip of the crank pulley. Getting those two holes to line up and getting it in such a way when you finally press the pulley in place that the pulley didn't turn ever so slightly, keeping you from being able to reinsert that small pin, again, is a bit of an issue. We had so much of a fight with it on the 2500 out there, we ended up just putting the pulley back on the crank and just re-pinning it in a slightly different spot. Let's see. So we kind of covered that. We covered the fact that what we have in here are performance, new cam bearings. We have a new crank, again, performance bearings as well. And of course, the forged pistons that you see here. So the first thing that I want to do, and even though they installed the crank for us and verified all the fitment, everything is thoroughly lubricated. I don't know if you can see it here, but everything's got a very nice sheen coat of oil on it. But what we'll do, just like we've done with engines in the past, we will pull this cam back out of here and just thoroughly, liberally coat it with the Permatex Red engine assembly lube that we typically use, the stuff I've showed you before that looks like cherry or strawberry syrup. And then we'll go ahead and get it reassembled and work on getting the thrust plate and all the timing gear on. So as this sets, we could do the rear main seal. We'll do that first. We'll get all of our timing hardware on here. We could potentially put the front timing cover on, and then finally the lower oil pan and windage tray and pickup tube and all that fun stuff. I think we should be able to get to all that. Now, if that'll all be in the same video, I'm not quite sure yet, because we're about 17 minutes into this one roughly with just the introduction and the overview. And after I cover a couple of things here, that'll probably be the first video, and then we'll come back do additional ones at that point. Let's see. So what I want to do, I've got you kind of holding a small tripod now. I want to bring you to the bench and get you propped up on a tripod. And what we're going to do is the modification to that phaser that we need in order, because we're running the larger cam, we need to limit the amount of advancement that the VVT, we're limiting what the VVT system can do as far as the variable valve timing, so we don't inadvertently, run our valves into our pistons, because again, your pistons and your valves, this is an interference engine, so your pistons and your valves are like Romeo and Juliet. Even though they really want to get together, if they do get together, bad things will ensue. So let me get you set up on a bench, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So I got you kind of pointed down to the bench here, and what you can see off the left-hand side here, this is a new phaser. This is a new OEM phaser. You probably saw it in one of our parts videos as we were progressing with this build. We have our Comp Cams phase limiter kit, which was supplied with the cam and the lifters and the springs and such from our tuner. And of course, I just printed out the instructions you see here for doing this modification to this phaser. It does require a T25 Torx bit, and we've got some Loctite here as well, some blue Loctite, and of course a torque wrench here off to the side in order to complete this modification. Let's get this phaser out of this box here, get the box out the way. I'll show you that part number, sorry. Let's see, let me pick you up a little bit so I can get you a better view of this part number. There you go. 5302-2243 AF-001. And This was purchased again for a 5.7 Hemi 2012 vintage. And just putting a disclaimer out there that, yes, I do show the part numbers in my videos because I do think it's helpful for individuals who may be looking for the same part. But however, before you just buy a part, 100% verify that it's the same part number is going to work for the application that you need it to work in. Now, what happens with these phasers is, again, we need to limit its ability, or its VVT, VVT ability, its ability to, alter that valve timing. What happens is we're going to loosen up all of these, remove all of these except for one. There is one critical screw on the front of this phaser. And don't worry, I'll pause you and bring you back and zoom you in a little bit when we get to the actual steps of this. That we're going to mark, because one of these screws, again, we only want to loosen. We do not want to remove. If you remove it, what will happen is that the spring in here will actually become unhooked, and you can see if you can see that in there. If I do it this way, yeah, you should be able to see that pin right there. And that one comes through, and it's this screw right here. This is the one. What we're going to do is just draw an X over it. So we want to make sure that we do not remove that one. We only want to loosen it. But the first thing we're going to do, and again, I'm just looking at the instructions here off to the right of the camera. And one thing that we have to do is on this other screw or pin that goes through, this other Torx bit, you see that little piece of spring that's laying right up against that pin. We need to be able to pull the spring off and take the tension off of that. Now this one will remove completely. We just need to get that spring that's laying on it, kind of back it off. And the way they do this, and again, this is the Comp Cams kit. And these instructions also come inside the kit. I just printed out a fresh set. It is nice. Like I said, they do give you a printed set to go by. And it's the same set of instructions. So inside of our kit here, we've got our block that's going to pull our spring back. And then it's got our little billet piece of material that we're going to install into our phaser. To keep it, to basically, again, limit its ability to change that valve timing. And that is the part, that is the billet piece of aluminum, I believe it is aluminum, that we're going to install into this phaser to limit that. Now, here's our little tool that's going to pull that spring back that we're looking for earlier. So I'm just going to kind of pre-thread that in there, get that started. And then what we're going to do is we're going to flip our phaser upside down. And you see these two fins here go right on top of that pin. And we push in place like that, and then as we tighten this screw up, it's going to pull that spring backwards and take the tension off of that pin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause you, I'm going to go get an Allen key, and then I'm going to zoom you in a little bit, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So I got you zoomed in a little bit, so hopefully that's easier to see. While I got you zoomed in, let's go over that one more time. Again, these are the two fingers, so to speak, on the end of this tool. They go over top of that pin, and they push in between those two springs you see there. That just goes in place. We're going to hand tighten this down to start, And I think they say to, let me look at the instructions here. Sorry, getting you out of view, but I'm just trying to find the right Allen key that fits this. Okay, so it's not a metric Allen. One moment, let me grab the other set. The instructions don't say what the Allen size is on that either. Let's see, let's try this one. 3/8. 3/8 Allen in this case. And looking at the instructions here, they say the tool slips. We got the tool in place. Place the tool over the visible pin. Got it. Running adjustable screw until it just touches the outside of the edge, which we have. It says to tighten the screw 1 turn, and it'll take the pressure off of that pin. So I'm going to just put a little piece of silver Sharpie mark on the head of that screw. And then we're going to go in 1 turn. Per their instructions, and we should be able to see. I'm going to go a little bit more than that just to be on the safe side. Okay, so I'm going to go 2 turns in instead of their 1 turn, and I think that, yeah, I can see that in there. That's pulled this little spring leaf here away from that pin. So now what we want to do is make sure that we don't knock this off. This needs to stay in place. And then we're going to set our phaser down and move on to the next step of this. And then this piece here, which is your guide pin or your locating pin where your phaser goes on your cam, we're going to put that up just like the instruction says. And then earlier, if you remember, we kind of eyeballed it manually from the back, but you can see here they do give you a picture inside the instructions here that show you that same thing about how to locate which one of these screws, again, you do not want to remove. So turn the phaser over, loosen the circle bolt pins that are opposite of the dowel pin slot in the picture. Proceed to remove the remaining four bolts. So again, big old cautions on the side margins. So what I'm going to do, and I'll pause the camera just so you're not watching me do this, is all I'm going to do is going to break the torque loose on this one, and I'm going to stop. Again, we're not going to remove it. But then we're going to remove the remaining 4 and slide this cover out of the way, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So one thing I forgot to mention is on these torque bits, make sure you've got a good impact rated set of these torque bits. The standard torque bits that you get like in the multi-screw bit type case, they will snap. Either A, trying to break the torque loose on these bolts, or B, when you have to put, I think it's 16 foot-pounds worth of torque on here and you're tightening it back up. Trust me, ask me how I know. So this is a set of Torx bits. It was power tools. I got them at O'Reilly's, but they were impact rated, and so far they've been able to handle up to this stuff just fine. So per the instructions, again, this one's just loose. We're not going to remove it, but we're going to remove the other 4. Now you got to remember this one over here in the corner as well is going to be a little bit longer, and it's also going to be a pin that you saw from underneath that we took the spring pressure away from. Yes, and I am wearing gloves because the edge of these phaser teeth can bite into your hands a little bit, especially when you're trying to hold this phaser and break the torque loose. But we were able to get it with, again, just a 1/4 inch set, just kind of holding the phaser like this and then using the ratchet to break the torque loose on these. So now we got our tool in place, we got this one loose but not out. We'll go ahead and work on taking the remainder of these bolts out. And I'm leaving the phaser in the orientation that they have it inside of our diagram, which is this locating pin is faced up. You see the tool, the spring tension relieving tool is over here on the left. And you'll have to forgive me. I'm going to go ahead and take the gloves off at this point, because it helps with touching the back of the camera and being able to see what you see. Now you'll see these three here are all the same size, a little bit shorter. You'll notice this one, when we go to remove it, is going to be a longer one, because again, that's where that spring was riding that we pulled the tension off of. So what we should be able to do now is just take this cover, swing it off to the side. As you can see that way, now we can see the inside of our phaser. Now, where this piece of metal goes is inside of our instructions. What they're pointing at is that we've got our tool here. They point to this hole here. And it says insert the limiter here with the cutout facing the center of the phaser. So there's your cutout. It's going to face the center. And what they want us to do with it is drop it right here into that position. And to show you that on the pictures, so there's our tool. We got a cover slid off to the side. You see this hole here. And you see this cavity right next to it. So that's the hole they're referring to there. It looks like in our instructions. That's our cavity. And as you saw, let me fish this back out of here if I can, just to show that to you one more time. Yeah, there we go. You can see we've got our center of our billet piece now inside there, as they would like it. And my understanding, what that's supposed to do is, you know, again, limit the amount of travel that this phaser can invoke as far as degrees of how it's going to change the timing. Okay, rotate the plate to cover this thing back up. Yep, we got that installed. We got that installed. You got to remember the longer pin goes over here. So we're just going to rotate this back in place. Just like that. And again, just out of my paranoia, just to make sure it's there. And I know I did this on camera twice now, but I'm going to do it again. Just for my... Oop. I'll tell you what, I'm going to do this. There we go. Just out of my paranoia, just want to make sure that that is forward like it's supposed to be. There we go. That is forward like it's supposed to be. That is in there. We're going to rotate our cover back around. There we go. Okay, now what they have us do is putting these screws back in. And in the limiter, remember the pin goes there, rotate blade back around. We did that. Apply blue Loctite to each bolt before installation and torque the bolts to 14 foot-pounds is what they want you to torque these to. Now, obviously, we're not going to put Loctite on this one because we can't remove it, but we will make sure that it gets torqued. So let me do that. I'm going to get some blue Loctite on these screws. I'm going to put them all back in. Remember, this one is our pin. This one goes over here. The other three go around it. And that's what I'm just using here. It's just some Permatex blue. I've always used Permatex. No particular reason, no particular preference, other than I've just always used it in the past. But anyway, that's what I'm using. I'm going to get these in here, get them Loctited, get them in, and then we'll get them torqued and we'll move on to the next piece. So one moment. And welcome back. So we've got them all started. They're all snug at this point, but they all had Loctite put on the threads, and of course that longer pin is down here. This one you see here in the kind of this right hand corner, the spring was a little bit in the way. One of the springs that runs underneath of this, so I did have to kind of jimmy that a little bit to finally get those threads to line up to be able to drop the screw in, but then it threaded in just fine. So just an FYI in case you run into that same issue. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get the torque wrench set up, and of course use the same method we did before. I'm just going to grab it with a set of gloves and torque this down. This is the piece that gets a little bit weird. Not weird, but if you have a you know, a jaw protected vise with some soft jaws, you may want to kind of chuck this in a jaw. Just be careful not to squeeze it down too far and bend this, you know, outer metal shell. But you might need to find a way of securing this, because you got to do 14 foot-pounds worth of torque. And on these small T25 fasteners, you actually have to turn that, I found, you know, which is a moderate amount of force, but you're kind of holding the phaser in this hand, and you got the torque wrench out, and a lever on this hand, you're kind of, you know, cranking it down until you get to where you need to go. So it can be a little problematic. But again, we've got them started. We've got our Loctite installed in our threads, and we're going to leave this in, as the instructions say, until we get all of these in. We get them all torqued, and that'll be the last thing we do before we remove that piece. So what I'm going to do, and obviously you've seen me torque fasteners before. Again, the instructions call for 14 foot-pounds, so we're going to set our torque wrench to that. And yes, this is, you may have seen this in previous videos. This is an AC Delco digital torque wrench, and the range on this one is 1.11 foot-pounds all the way up to 22 foot-pounds. So again, we'll set for 14. We'll get them all torqued, and I'll bring you back for the next piece. One moment. And welcome back. So got you zoomed in here a little bit, and we've got them all in at this point. We've got them torqued. They're nice and tight. They're not going anywhere. So now what we can do is just come in here, take our Allen key, and remove our adapter. So that puts that spring pressure back on that pin. You might hear a little bit of a rattle in there, but again, normal, because now we have that little billet piece of material, which, if memory serves correctly, should be right about in here somewhere. Because if you remember, the screw you didn't take out was right there. We've got the X on it. That was the one, the longer pin one, and that little piece went right about here. Now, you probably can't see it too well on the camera, but as we got these torqued, we hit them with a silver Sharpie and just colored in the ends of the Torx heads completely. That way we can mark it that we've had that one torqued and we're good to move to the next one. Okay, with that being said, let me bring you back over to the engine, and we'll take care of the next piece. And after this next piece, we may cut it at a video at that point, because we're getting a little bit long on this one. And then we'll bring you back for the next one and obviously continue the process. But let's get this part over to the bench where we're going to need it eventually, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So just in the process of getting the engine block off the engine stand. And this is how I normally do it. I just got a set of chains. I took off the leveler to protect the block surface. I just got a piece of 2x4 that the bolt goes through, and then it's just a couple of old head bolts that bolt into kind of roughly the center of the block. And I find that this works pretty good for being able to lift a block up and kind of move it around, at least until the heads are on it, and then we'll put the actual Eagle lifting adapter on for this block and lift it up that way. So again, just in the process of lifting this up to get the tension off of our engine stand, and then we could take our mounting bolts out here and get to the access we need to get that rear main seal on. Again, this is not something you would typically do. Most times, just for safety reasons. Sometimes you have to do it, but in this case, we have to do it as well. Typically, if you're going to work on an engine block like this, it's going to be on a stand, just for safety reasons. You don't typically want to work off a block that's being supported by a chain in the event something happens. But as we stated earlier, in order to get that rear main seal on, I don't have the clearance between here and the engine mount block to be able to do that. So we have to take it off, support it by our hoist just for a little bit until we can get that rear seal on, and then we can put it back on the engine stand for everything else that we have to do. Now, the reason why we're wanting to put this rear main seal on is because the bottom of the rear main seal is a section where the windage tray for the oil pan as well as the oil pan will actually bolt to and seal to. So it needs to be in place, and the front timing cover needs to be in place before we can put the windage tray and the oil pan in place. So that's why we're going to go ahead and tackle this next, and then we'll go from there. So I'll bring you right back once we can get the bolts out of the stand and we're ready to throw this rear main seal on. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see the access to the back of our block at this point. You can see that it looks like they've got some engine assembly lube. So that's nice to see. As well as just kind of looking at the surface of our crank here, and it already looks nice and clean. We'll get the residuals, dirt and debris off of this, as you can see there, before we put the seal in, because if I remember correctly, they want these seals to be installed dry, or at least last time I put one of these seals in, they made a comment in the manual to install it dry and not to have oil residue on the crank, which that looks good there. Actually, I might hit it with a little bit of brake clean just to help get some more residual crap off. But what I want to do first is, you can see the areas here that have been touched with paint, and I want to get this mating surface here around this crank cleaned up, so that way we get a nice good seal. And the bolts used on that rear main seal housing, there's your part number there, 6506342 Alpha Alpha. And of course the rear main seal itself, and we do have a factory one. You can see the part number right there. So I'm going to work on getting this cleaned up, and then I'll bring you right back when we're ready to press this seal in place. It does come with one of those protective sleeves that you'll see in the inside of the seal that you just place over the cam and kind of push it in place in one motion, and then put in the bolts and torque. So let me get to work on this, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our area sealing surface cleaned up here. Got all our paint removed. Again, just a little bit of brake clean, a little bit of towel does a wondrous job about removing all the paint overspray and grease and oil and things of that nature. Went ahead and wiped off the surface of our cam here in the back. And then when you get these seals, whether they be aftermarket or OEM, they all come with that kind of lip protector now, and what that's supposed to do is this cup will fit over this drive shaft. So when you press this in place, it'll push this cup out, and it's supposed to keep the edge of this seal from rolling over and potentially causing a sealing problem. So what I need to do is get you mounted up onto a taller tripod. And then I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So I got you on a little bit taller tripod. Looks like we got a pretty good view of what's going on back here. So once again, we've got our surfaces wiped down and clean. We're just going to take our rear main seal, put that cup, which will help center it as well, over the drive shaft, get our bolt holes to line up, and then we should just be able to push this into place. There we go. Beautiful. And now we can take our bolts, get them bolted in, put a little bit of Loctite. I'm going to put a little bit of blue Loctite on it. The book doesn't call for putting Loctite on the back of these, but I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite on these just to be on the safe side. I can keep you rolling while I do some of these. Eventually I'll pause you just so you're not watching me put in bolts and then torque them. I'm going to start them all in by hand first just to make sure that we're good and lined up. In case you're curious of the torque pattern, hopefully you can see that there. This looks like it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And according to the instructions, they say to torque these to 10 foot-pounds. Again, I'm saying torque measurements in my videos, but take them with a grain of salt when it comes to your application. Even if you are working on a 5.7 Hemi, just as this one is, because your measurements could be different, even though it is the same motor. Okay, yep. Just make sure that was straight. There's a couple of guide pins that you probably saw on the back of the seal. They're here and they're here, and they should drive in and help keep that seal in alignment. And again, I'm just putting a little bit of drop of Loctite. And it's the blue Loctite. So you can break it loose with common hand tools. Again, it's just a little bit of extra security. Because if at all possible, I would not like to have to revisit any of this, especially a rear main, because this would require, at a minimum, dropping the transmission and pulling it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hand tighten these first, and I'm going to follow that torque pattern I showed you earlier. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Get it to draw in. Once it's hand tight, then we'll come back with a torque wrench and torque it. But I'm going to go ahead and pause you just so you're not, watching me tighten down bolts, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So again, just continuing to go through and just hand snug these bolts up per the torque pattern. See, 3 is down here in the corner. Sorry for the engine block bouncing around. It is being supported by a chain. I'm trying to limit it as much as I can, but it is a pendulum right now. Okay, there we go. So everything is just hand snug at this point. And to show you, let me get you by here on the edge. You can see that our edge is flat. You can see that the dowel pins that were on either side here have seated into the block. Everything looks good. Everything's hand tight. So now we can come back here and torque it, and then we can follow our torque pattern just the same as we did when we hand tightened it. And then hopefully that means that we'll now have this seal installed. So I'm going to finish torquing this up, and then I'll bring you back. I am going to transition this. I might shoot a little bit of video of it, but I will transition this off of the cherry picker that you see here back onto the engine stand. So one moment. And welcome back. So just to show you, in case you're curious, luckily the engine stand we have just to show you, fits pretty good within the feet of the hoist, so we can get in here pretty close. And it's just a matter of kind of pulling the engine, raising it up on the cherry picker, maybe lower it on the cherry picker, and just kind of finagling with it a little bit to get everything nice and straight so you can do a good job of getting your bolts lined up. And in case you're curious, yes, these are the hardened bolts, and I think I got these from Jegs, but I think these are what, grade 8 bolts, more than likely. They're just a high tensile bolt, so they can withstand obviously the weight of a block, so the bolts don't bend and or potentially snap. I think you can also go to the hardware store and buy grade 8 bolts as well. But either way, anyway, in case you're curious, I got them from Jegs. Came in a kit. Came with the bolts which match up this block, and it came with 4 other ones which were a slightly different thread pitch. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just kind of play around with the block here, raise and lower it as needed to kind of get everything to line up. And just like with anything else, I always start these by hand before I tighten them up, because they do thread into these same holes in the transmission bell housing that secure the transmission. So you definitely don't want to cross thread one of these and damage them. Otherwise, you're going to set yourself up for a very bad day. But I'm going to finagle this and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So we've got all of our bolts tightened on the back for all 4 of our. And again, it's a dancing act. It's a little bit of a Jenga act, you know, up and down with the block and shimmy it side to side. But eventually you should be able to get your holes to line up well enough you can get the bolts again started by hand and kind of go from there. But now that we've got it bolted back in place, we can finish taking the pressure off of our cherry picker and get our cherry picker packed up and out of our way and proceed on. There we go. Okay, now that that's out of there, we can get our hook off. And we can take our bolts out for our blocks, and I'll finish packing up the cherry picker, put the engine stand back in a little bit more accessible position. I'll bring you right back in one moment. And welcome back. You can see that we're back on our engine stand at this point. Just to show it to you, you can see that we've got our rear main seal installed. So awesome. Again, if you remember, that had to go in first because we need that to be there in order to get our oil pan and everything installed, because it does bolt into the bottom of that rear main seal. I think what I'm going to do at this point is we're going to cut it. We're going to call this one a video, and then we'll bring you back for the next one. And then the next one, we'll get in and start doing all the timing components on the front, potentially install lifters, the MDS block off plugs, and we'll probably get this block to the state in which we can't do anything more with it until the head gaskets arrive. And then we'll finish the setup of the long block at that point. But hopefully in this video, you got some useful information out of it. We covered what the work the machine shop did, which was the custom keyway in the crank, which we'll use for the front crank pulley when we get to that step. We've got the performance crank bearings, performance cam bearings. The crank has been polished and balanced. If you remember earlier, we went with the forged pistons, probably a little bit of an overkill, but we're just trying to make the block as stout as we could get it. And we covered the rear main seal install and the modification that was needed to the phaser to limit its ability with how far, how many degrees it can kind of play with the VVT timing, because again, we're running a high lift cam, so we don't want our valves to kiss into our pistons. We also covered the fact that the block has been decked 6 thousandths of an inch off each side, and I think we're going to combat that with those 10 thousandths of an inch thicker maul head gaskets we're having on the way, because that'll eat up the 6 mil they took off I'm sorry, 6,000. I don't know why I keep saying mil. I really need to stop doing that. But they took off, that'll eat up the 6,000s they took off, and it'll leave 4,000s in which the head will be lifted up just ever so slightly off the block. Again, talking to my tuner on that, he didn't even think that leaving it with just 6,000s was going to cause an issue overall. So I think dropping that down to 4,000s of a increase in head cylinder head space, I think should just give us that extra margin, give us an extra fuzzy. But again, like I said earlier in the video, I'm curious of your input on that, whether you even think, if we went with factory gaskets, whether a 6,000ths difference is enough of a difference to warrant, custom push rods. Because I did look at the custom push rods available, and they jump considerably. You have to get considerably bigger than 6,000ths of an inch before they jump to the next available size. Unless you're getting something really, really custom, in which you give them the measurements and they custom make you a kind of one-of-a-kind set. Anyway, with that being said, with this is being shot on Christmas Eve, whichever holiday that you may celebrate. Happy holidays to all. And I thank everybody who have subscribed this year and will continue to subscribe this year, and look forward to bringing you back for even more items into next year. As far as the next video in this series, as soon as I can get it done, I'll get it up. It should go up before the end of this year. And like I said, that second video should get us to the point where we've taken it as far as we can take it, and we'll just have to wait for the head gaskets to come in at that point. So once again, if you have subscribed, thank you immensely. If you have not, please consider doing so, and I will bring you back for the next one. On the next one, just show you a little bit of preview of a surprise. Check that out. This is a Melling high volume oil pump for this generation Hemi. I'll put a link in the description of the video to Reignited, in which he spoke about this, and we're going to use it on this build. So it was perfect timing he should mention that. So I like to give credit where credit is due. We'll use it in this build, and typically what I would normally use is a Hellcat oil pump on this build, which has a higher volume of flow than a standard 5.7. So it's a oil pump that everyone calls a Hellcat oil pump, but it's really just out of a 6.2 supercharged Hemi that we use on our 5.7s. We're going to switch over to Melling one, because the Melling one has 20-ish% more volume flow than a stock 5.7. So it's even a higher volume flow of oil than even the quote-unquote Hellcat oil pump was. So we'll be using this build, and we'll get into more of that on the next video when we start setting up the timing on the front of this. With that being said, I've rambled on long enough. I will let you go, and I'll bring you back for the next one. Thank you much. Bye.